Welcome everyone. My name is Johannes Romppanen, and this is our third session now from the talks about photobooks with Teun van der Heijden as our last speaker. First, I'll just talk through a bit about the background and the thoughts and the motivation of why we are doing this, and then have a short word from our partners, and then we'll kick off with the talk itself. Shortly, my background, I'm here representing Aalto University, where I'm currently doing my MA in photography, and I also have a background in doing different kind of photobook related events. I've been co-founder of Photobooks from Helsinki, Photobooks from Finland. Sorry, where we're doing different kind of events where kind of activating the space and activating the community and trying to engage people to create stuff. And currently locally, I'm hosting Photobooks from Photobook Club Helsinki. That's a event series going on once a month, where we go and check out different places in the city that are somehow related to publications, publishing, bookmaking, photography. And it's been super nice. We've been now doing that over 2 years here. And then globally, this is my initiative to try to kind of connect people and thoughts on a bit of a larger audience. And it actually came from when I started my studies here in Aalto, to really think about, because my kind of own practice has been really practical, and then I was thinking, okay, what kind of thinkers and makers are there around here. And we did a first session last year in May, and then it got really good feedback. So then we started to plan a next session, and that's what we are doing here now. And then I reached out to Emmanuel in bookRoom, and also Reflektor in a collective, photobook collective in Vienna. And so there was the idea to kind of have this dialogue and discussions together and see, like, to also get a bit broader audience. And we all parties then kind of suggested a speaker, and that's the combo we have here now. Yes, let's go to a bit of practicalities. First, they're going to be this around approximately 1 hour talk from Teun, and then there's a free discussion, open discussion, and I really invite everyone to participate. And I see this more not so much as a lecture, more kind of like a gathering where we kind of are discussing and sharing ideas. And if you don't feel comfortable in kind of opening up the camera and speaking up, the chat is there then for you to put down your thoughts, and we'll bring them up. And we'll be recording this, so it's going to be available also for a larger audience after the talk. So getting it out this week, or maybe next week. But yeah, this is, I think, all from me. Let's hear a few words just from Emmanuel first, to briefly just present what bookRoom is about, and then Reflektor, and then we kind of give the word to Teun. Thank you.
Hello and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon from sunny London, which happens sometimes. So yes, it's great to be part of this project, and that's really at the heart of what bookRoom is trying to do. So bookRoom is a kind of experimental research and publishing platform, and within the School of Fine Art and Photography at University for the Creative Arts in Farnham in England. And what we do, we engage with editorial, curatorial, and critical research through a number of various activities, PhDs and research degrees. Yes, last week we had Emma Lambert, one of our PhD, who was presented. We have bookRoom Press, so we do artist book publications, but also different surveys and anthologies. which are now mostly out of print, but they are all available freely online as well. I'll say a few words after that. Actually, there's 3 of them. Codex, Paper, Ink, Pixel and Screen, which was published in 2015. The Book is Alive in 2013, and a couple of others. I'll put the link where you can get access to these. So for the past 12 or 15 years now, we've been surveying, exploring the parallel histories of the photo book and of the artist book, among other things, and always being interested in the kind of books and a kind of artist as well, who operate at what I call the critical age of more mainstream art institution and conventional publishing and their respective gatekeepers. So in order to do that, it's to try to bring together academic and non-academic artists and makers and thinkers and collectors in dialogue and try to see what we can do together. To not question what a not necessarily question what an artist book is or a photo book, because it is many things, as we know, but what they can do and how they can help us. I'm sorry, someone is drilling. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Behind. So yes, that's what we do, and this is great to be involved in this kind of discussions. And using, we operate, I call us a platform. So in a post-digital context, the fact that we can be together using technology, so is a great thing as well. So I'm really looking forward to today's talk of tunes to really see, what can be done with the book beyond just making it or making it public. That's where I will stop.
Thank you. Brenny, if you could say a few words about Reflektor.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Frini Hockenius, and together with Thomas Litzek, and in a way also Johannes, we are representing Reflektor. We're all members of a non-profit organization based in Vienna, and it's both photographers and photo book enthusiasts, and together, we're also doing a lot of, trying to find a home for self-published photo books that we try to make these more known. And so we go to festivals or attend, various fairs and but also do events like the photo book breakfast, which regularly takes place. I learned last Saturdays from Emma's this word to activate a photo book, which I really I hadn't had that in my vocabulary, but yeah, that's actually also what we are trying to do. And I really look forward to hearing Teun talk about how I will be able to sit in a photo book. So yeah, thank you for today's talk. And Johannes, thank you so much for organizing all this.
No, thank you. It's been my pleasure. And as we hear here, I mean, we're kind of brought together with this ethos of kind of creating these spaces that are open for anyone to share and to learn. And it's been super nice also. Here we have three speakers with really different backgrounds. So also kind of emphasizing kind of the different aspects and point of use that you can have to the photo book. But further ado, Teun, the floor is yours. I'll give my stick over to you, and you can continue. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Well, hello everyone. I will start talking about the way I work and the way I think in a second. I will share my desktop now. Johannes, if you can let me know if everything runs.
Yeah, now we see also your desktop, everything. So just put the...
Okay, what is different from what we did
I
before?
think you just have to
1 second.
put the presentation mode on.
Yeah, I have to put the presentation mode on. I guess that's it.
We are still seeing the desktop now. It's looking good. Yeah.
Now it's good, huh?
Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. I will tell a little bit about my background. I graduated as a graphic designer many years ago, ended up in the photographic realm. And especially, I think, at some point when I started to work for the organization that is based here in Amsterdam, World Press Photo, I really got involved in photography. Photography meaning photojournalism at the time. And within that realm of being active in photojournalism, I started to make books, originally more for organizations. Like the first books I designed were the catalogs for World Press Photo. And with having that experience of working with photography that I really liked, at that time, I started to dream about working directly with photographers, because if you compile a catalog, then there's a limit element of storytelling in it, but it's very limited. But during that time, I started to think, what if I could work directly with makers and maybe be involved in the narration or the storytelling, and that's basically what my thinking and my lecture is about. So, okay, I have to click one more time. So my way of thinking, sorry, I have to go back. Started with this quote that I read in Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag. The quote is, though not by Susan Sontag, it's by Walter Lippmann, who wrote in 1922, "Photographs have the kind of authority over imagined today which the printed word had yesterday and the spoken word before that. They seem utterly real." For me, that way of thinking about the fact that this is more than 100 years ago now, was really interesting. How photography at the time started to play a very important role in the realm of printing. That's why Lippmann refers to it as "they seem utterly real." But what really intrigued me in that quote is that he made this sort of connection to a language that was very present before, that he called the printed word, and he connected that to yesterday, and the spoken word that he connected to a time before that. So for me, I paraphrased his quote to a way of thinking that I still use until today. The visual language is the language of today. In a way, the written language was the language of yesterday, and the spoken language before that. And I think that everybody understands nowadays, with social media and all this visual violence that we're in, that this is absolutely a situation that we're in. And my way of thinking connected to the photo book is, does that mean that the photo book is the novel of the visual language? I just want to make a sidestep to 2 examples of visual storytelling that really have influenced me. Here's a quote by Tibor Kalman. Tibor Kalman was a Hungarian-American graphic designer and art director, and he was the founding editor-in-chief of Benetton's sponsored magazine, Colors. "When you make something no one hates, no one loves it." Here's something that I trembled upon like more or less 20 years ago. I think this is from the 1990s, this magazine. So Tibor Kalman was one of the founding editors-in-chief of Colors magazine. Colors was a sponsored magazine by Benetton, the Italian brand. And here's a cover of a travel special. And this is what Tibor Kalman wrote about it. Colors 11, the travel issue, was devoted to the world's biggest business, the travel industry. The content shows a critical and humorous perspective on traveling, a dreary whistle-stop tour through Europe, travel tips for refugees, and the travel photographs of a blind photographer. Tibor Kalman. The most outlandish choice of photograph was, of course, reserved for the cover. Passengers aboard a crash-landed Aloha Airlines flight minutes after seeing the fuselage ripped off while airborne. It's bloody and frightening, and there are people in pain, but it's also really funny. Here's this plane that is a convertible. One of the most controversial things we did was clean up some of the blood in the picture just because we didn't want it to be such a downer. Now, people might ask how we dare to sanitize a terrible accident in which lives are lost. And it's awful, but it's funny. It's tragic, and it's funny. Also, it's great on the cover of a travel issue. These are the words of Tibor Kalman. So I knew the magazine, and at some point I read an article about Tibor Kalman explaining this. And I think I always felt very strongly connected to that cover, but reading the explanation of Kalman, here's this plane that is a convertible, was really something powerful for me. So we see an image of a plane crash, but there's this sort of happy feeling connected to this photograph. And I was, and because of the explanation of Tibor Kalman, I really got intrigued. What does something in a photograph gives you a different feeling than the exact meaning of a photograph? Here's a saying of Mark Porter. He was one of the art directors of Colors. One of the things I learned from working with Tibor is that most people aren't interested in design. If people look at a publication and see design, then you have failed as an art director. What they should see is words, pictures, and ideas. I think that's a very important message for book designers as well. So that was one example of visual storytelling that really intrigued me. Here's another. At some point, I was working with a student of the Royal Academy in The Hague, and he only shot abstract pictures. And he connected me to this one photograph, and it's actually a very famous photograph, taken by the Voyager 1. Often when I give lectures, I ask the class if everyone knows this photograph, if it even is a photograph. Sometimes people have seen the photograph before. Sometimes the discussion is about, is it a photograph or not, because it's such an abstract image. The title of the photograph is The Pale Blue Dot. And I'm hoping that everybody can see it on their screens, but there's a little white, well, in reality, obviously pale blue dot in the left, in the sort of right color beam. And this is a picture taken by the Voyager 1 of the Earth. The little dot is the Earth. And that the picture in itself is already intriguing, I find. But for me, it's a wonderful combination of connecting it to what Carl Sagan, he was the scientist who was involved in the project of the Voyager 1, what Carl Sagan wrote about this after he saw this photograph. Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. And that's about imagination. And for me, that was really, really strong, how an image connected to text and how the interaction between text and images can really lead to something. Roughly 20 years ago, I was still working very heavily in the realm of photojournalism. I got contacted by a photographer called Stanley Green. Stanley Green was a conflict photographer, photojournalist who lived in Paris. And he saw some of the book projects that I designed before and was interested in a collaboration. I went to Paris to dive together with him, dive into his archive. And the idea was to make a sort of overview of his conflict work. There was a French publisher interested in that. But while we were talking about the project, accidentally, I saw a color magazine, a Russian color magazine, in a box of black and white prints of the Iraq War. And on the cover of the color magazine was a scarcely dressed lady sort of sensually biting a strawberry. It was a very, very tacky image. Well, according to me, it was a very tacky image. So I made a comment to Stanley, like, did somebody leave this magazine accidentally in this box? And then the conversation started that Stanley said, no, I have an article in that magazine. And then I made a comment about the tacky cover. And then it turned out that Stanley took the photograph of the lady. So this is an anecdote that lead into a different discussion. By then we were looking at all his war images, and sort of it was uncomfortable for me. It was uncomfortable for him. So I think he started to defend himself by saying, didn't you know that I was a fashion photographer before? And all of a sudden he showed me older work of his days as a fashion photographer, but also snapshots of his private life. And then the idea occurred, what is it not an interesting idea of maybe mixing the private work with the conflict work? And in the beginning, we didn't really have a clear idea. I think it was an idea that sort of spontaneous occurred in my mind. And Stanley said, okay, that seems like a very dangerous idea, so let's try it. And he sent me off with the assignment to make like a 20 or 30-page dummy. And he gave me some images. So here's an example of a photograph of a Russian female resistance fighter. And at the moment, and I didn't really have a clear idea, but I know that I wanted to make it really, really personal. So I started playing with some text. Well, coincidentally, a few years before I met Stanley, I also traveled to so Stanley worked a lot in Chechnya during the Chechen War. And a few years before I met Stanley, I traveled to Ingushetia, which is the neighboring country of Chechnya, to, as a photographer, actually shoot a series of portraits of Chechen refugees for a magazine that we were working for as graphic designers for Amnesty International. So I had some personal experiences of being in an environment like that. So what I did is I mixed my personal experience with anecdotes I heard from Stanley. So here's scene one, a young girl I was. I loved the strawberries mother picked from the garden. Someday I keep a garden like that for my child. Umar was born on a hot spring evening. My husband took him 3 years later when he flew to Georgia. I was a nurse then. Stitched a million wounds before I empty my rifle into the belly of a 20-year-old Russian soldier. Sometimes I dream about my garden, picking strawberries for Umar, ticking like a bomb. So that was like one thing I wrote. And there's another one which I connected to a nightlife photograph of Paris. Sleepwalking in Paris. Ian already left. Kissed for the very first time. These lyrics got stuck into my brains. We danced all night on this fucking line. Eat some kebab at Ali's place. Joy Division. And the interesting thing is that this is just playing. This is not serious. This is not going in a certain direction. It's not a very well thought of concept, but it is the beginning of something. For me, this is comparable to Tibor Kalman seeing a convertible plane instead of a crash plane. And for me, this is very powerful in storytelling. So eventually, Stanley and I obviously went back and forth many, many times. And eventually, we created this book called Black Passport that is published in 2009, and which basically became a visual biography of a war photographer. In the beginning, we went through several steps. We started playing with that fantasy idea for a long period of time. So I extended the 20, 30 page dummy into a 100-page dummy. Stanley also got all enthusiastic about this fantasy play. So he said, okay, we're going to invent a fictional character. Maybe this is a Jewish soldier who goes through this all, and we're going to create this. But we didn't really had a clear idea. So at some point, I showed the dummy in Perpignan at the photo festival to a few of Stanley's friends and other conflict photographers. And I remember that most of them reacted very spontaneously and very enthusiastic about that, until Philip Blenkinsop, a photographer, asked me, but I really like what you did as a flow, but what is it about? And then I couldn't explain better than, well, we're thinking about making a fictional story about it. And then Philip looked at me and said, but those are real dead people in there. So he basically touched upon the ethical part of playing, having this sort of fantasy of storytelling, but playing with real people's lives, or playing with real stories. So that made me think that indeed just foolishly playing around with this kind of content is obviously impossible. So eventually I thought there's only one reason for making this book, and that if this book is about Stanley's life. So I had to convince him about this concept of making a visual biography. That where he always felt uncomfortable about this, and he never really gave me permission, but he constantly kept saying, you just continue to work on the story, you just continue to work on the book, and then we'll decide by the time you finish. Well, eventually the book got published, so I don't have to explain that. Eventually he gave his permission. But the interesting thing is, one of the original things of my fantasy stories that I just wrote for you is that at some point I started to interview Stanley for this book. And I did that over the course of time of a year and a half, collected 230 pages of transcription that I personally compiled into very short anecdotes. And I think that in these short anecdotes that eventually ended up in the book, I sort of kept the tone of voice, or the monologue tone of voice, of my original fantasy. And for me, that is very powerful. Sometimes what I learned while working on Black Passport, I have to say Stanley was a huge cinema fan. And I was, I think for the first time as a graphic designer, being heavily involved in the textual part. So I was constantly playing with the idea of how text and images blend best. And if you have like a more traditional photo book where you have a lot of photographs and maybe some longer essays, I always sensed and I found it difficult to adapt from one reading mode to another reading mode. So what I wanted to do with Black Passport is sort of keep in the same speed. So, what we do is we look at pictures faster than that we read words. So I forced myself to tell the story of Stanley's life in anecdotes that never were longer than a page, which really forced me to make the text incredibly compact, but also it helps to keep the reader in that rhythm. And this is what I came up with after working on Black Passport. The speed and rhythm of a photo book is faster than a textbook, but slower than a film.
Now we're having
Here's
some,
a little...
I think we have some problems with
Okay. What problems do we have?
We're just seeing a fragment of the...
Oh,
now we see the whole page, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Johannes, because that's indeed something I cannot check. So the speed and rhythm of a photo book is faster than a textbook, but slower than a film. And here's a little note from my notebook at the time, that this idea of the photo book being in between two other media. Let's say I've shared these thoughts with audiences before. At some point, there was somebody in the audience who said, "Hey, but that's close to the quote of Louis Bolt, who is an American visual artist." Louis Bolt, I looked it up, that the photo book occupies that deep era between the novel and film. So I think that's a very important thought. And then if we think about the photo book as a sort of specific medium, it is a book, like a novel. Then my opinion is that this particular photo book or the visual novel needs an active reader. I got inspired when I read about the correspondence between Thomas More and Erasmus. They discussed the concept of writing fully interpretable text, positive or negative or something in between, ambiguous, ambivalent. They played with the reader. The reader was constantly forced to have an opinion, to activate their imagination. The reader cannot just be carried away. For me, that is a very important thought in the compilation of photo books. Here's another project I've worked with. Roughly 10 years ago, I started to work with Elena Bruderus. Hopefully I say it right, for a partly Finnish audience. And this story is about her and her husband who were trying to become parents.
Sorry, I'm interrupting again. Now we're just having a black screen.
Oh,
for some reason.
Why is that?
Remember?
Because I'm playing a video, actually.
Yeah. Well, it started the video and then it went black. But when we did testing, everything was fine.
And now? No.
No.
Oh, that's a shame.
And now there's some glitch. We kind of saw.
Yeah, maybe it's
parts of the screen.
Yeah, maybe it's the combination of running the program and running Zoom. Because now it flips.
You can have a short technical intermission if you just try to relaunch the.
What do you see now, Johannes?
It's black.
Okay, then I think we just got stuck. So I relaunch it.
If you relaunch your presentation.
Yeah.
And now is the time for the host to tell some really funny jokes and stuff like that. You can put your jokes in the chat. Yeah, that's a good thing for everyone.
I wasn't going to say a joke. I was just saying that it's a very good cliffhanger. I'm really excited to hear more about Elena Bruderus' book and how Teun was involved in that.
Yeah, I was also asking him when before we started that has he been working with any Finnish photographers, and then Elena came.
Okay, I'm gonna reconnect now and then just cross our fingers. There is an intense delay on my screen somehow. Where are we now?
Now we see a book cover.
Yeah. So now the challenge is, will it run? Does something happen or not?
Yeah, it's running now.
Okay, good.
It looks good.
Well, hopefully we don't have that too much.
Yeah.
So this is a project I started with Elena. She and her husband wanted to become parents, and that didn't happen naturally. So they went through this whole IVF process, and Elena carefully documented that, like what it did for her, what it did for her husband. It became a project called Annonciation or Annonciation that she also already showed as exhibitions. And when she came with me, we went through the photographs. We started working on the edit. I also had an example of the exhibition edits, and I wanted to do it differently because in the book there's a continuous flow, which is different than three-dimensional on the wall. And I was sort of overwhelmed by an intense sadness in her work that I felt was kind of difficult to sort of begin the book with. So in our discussions, we talked about. I also have to say that for Elina and her husband, this whole period of time going through the IVF process that took roughly 4 years didn't end successfully. Elina never became pregnant, and they had to continue their lives without a kid. So for me, when I was talking with Elena, I said, for me, the spirit of life is, you have beautifully captured it, but it is kind of difficult for a book to immediately drop into a heartbreaking part of a life. And part of that, even although it is a sad period of time in your life, it is a period of time in a life. And I sort of want to visualize that by making the book be more of a representative of your other life. So we start playing with the idea of making a prologue. The idea was not so much that the way we went about is that I said, I would rather begin with an earlier phase in your life. And do you not have work, archival work that we can look at that could represent that? So Elina gave me access to a big part of her archive. And we started to create this idea of a life before as a sort of short prologue. But also we created, at some point, Elina made a lot of self-portraiture, and some of these portraits were also very reflective or even funny or crazy. So somehow we also created this kind of dream state that worked as a prologue. And I think that was very important to sort of make the reader of her story sort of ready. Let's say first get to know her or get to know her work before you actually dive into this very intense, intimate story. And I think that was a very powerful decision that we made at the time. I'm talking a lot about edit decisions or ways of how to go about or how to start working on a book project. And I got incredibly interested in the process of editing. Here, a few years ago, I took a sabbatical, and the idea was to sit down and to try to put in words my ideas of editing, or how does the editing process roughly works. So when I mean editing, I talk about the editorial process of arranging photographs that accompany an article in a publication or that exists on their own and imply a narrative or outline of a creative concept, like a visual story in a photo book or an arrangement of images in a film. I started getting an interest in neuroscience. I read a book by a Dutch neuroscientist called The Conscious Network. And that triggered actually my interest in neuroscience, because if you think about the process of editing, you think about a process of decision making. And this might be conscious decision making, but it's also, for a big part, subconscious decision making. Well, in the book of Cyril Pennard, he talks a lot about a neurological perspective where, let's say, the idea of consciousness and subconsciousness live, and that basically an image is created by the brain, not necessarily an image is neutral. Each of us sees things differently. And by now it is also known that whatever we experience as what we see at this moment is actually a mixture of what we have seen from 15 seconds in the past. So I drew this simple illustration as an illustration of the brain. So basically, a visual image is created in the brain. It's like information traveling through the brain. And there's early analysis and later analysis. The early analysis takes place in the visual cortex, in the occipital lobe in the back of our brains. Then this information traveled through the rest of our brain, and then we get higher analysis. Higher analysis means that we connect meaning to what we see. Let's say for one example is that we all have a declarative memory, which is basically, it's not like our motoric memory that is responsible for how we move our body, but it's that memory that we use for storytelling. All these bits and pieces of things that we have learned in our lives that we're constantly rejuggling for storytelling, which consists out of a semantic part and an episodic part. I would say this is the more aware way of how we look at images, but there's also a less aware way of how we look at images, and that really intrigued me. In my sabbatical year, I wrote an article. It is called Of Simple Cells and Visual Associations in Photobook Editing. It is published by Trans-Asia Photography, Duke University Press. The core of the article describes the theory of a more subconscious analytical process of photographic editing. A simple cell is a cell that exists in the primary section of the visual cortex. And it is David Huber and Torsten Wiesel who discovered these cells. They discovered that in the back of our brains, there are cells who can only do one thing. They can only detect dark or color, or they can only focus on strong horizontal bars. Huber and Wiesel referred to these cells as simple cells, and that really inspired me, that idea of simples. Researchers have recorded more cells in this region responding to differences in color, spatial frequency, moderately complex patterns, and object orientation. So this whole information that I got from neuroscience inspired me to actually work on an idea of visual analysis that is based on a more subconscious analysis. And I divided it in 4 groups. Basic composition, looking for strong horizontal, vertical, or diagonal orientation. Light and dark, the character of light, happy or sad. Think about the bright blue sky on the plane of Tibor Kalman. It's a happy sky, and therefore it's a happy plane. Texture, there's a lot of texture present in a photographic image. The photographic image in itself might often be seen on a screen or on a certain surface of paper, but there's a lot of texture that you can fantasize about that is captured in the photograph, like skin or a brick wall or whatever it is. But also photographic texture, the style of photography, like artificial intelligence is hyper real, but is referred to as a certain texture compared, for instance, to coarse grain treatment that we've seen a lot in the 1950s. Color is incredibly important. This is a little bit theoretical, and I can imagine maybe a bit difficult to understand. So I want to go to Elena's book and go back to the prologue I made of her book. And I want to show you 4 photographs that I made, that I used as the beginning of the prologue. Yeah, there is a delay, Johannes, in my screen. Every now and then, we'll see how it goes. Until now. So here are the 4 photographs that I used as the beginning 4 photographs in the prologue of Elena's book. And here is the idea of basic composition. So there's a very strong horizontal orientation to use these 4 photographs in a row. You can see that the horizontal orientation sort of slightly shifts into a diagonal orientation and then shifts into a vertical orientation. And that's a very important aspect to understand why this is such an interesting sequence. In this particular case, the lighting is not so daring, because I think the 4 photographs that I used for Elena's book are all taken on overcast days, and therefore have a similarity in overcast in soft lighting. Here's an analysis on the palette of grays. There is a strong palette of grays, but they sort of shift to browns and greens and blues. Here's an example of a similarity in texture in all of these 4 photographs. And the interesting thing is that if you look at photographs on this level, what I call a more subconscious level, sort of disattaching it from the real meaning of the photograph. The fact that we see a river with and a city in a storm, the fact that we see the hood of a car, the fact that we see a woman tipping her foot into the water, or the fact that we see a dog running in the forest. At this point, for me, it's not that it is not there, but I sort of try to shift it a little bit further for now. And the reason to do it is that it might give you other ways of looking. Like here is a combination of an ultrasound scan that I combined with the city of New York. And it's not that I literally see the ultrasound scan, but somehow in a sort of vague cloud in my brain, when I see that photograph of the city of New York, I thought of a spine somehow, and I don't know exactly why. Here's another, maybe more obvious connection that you see. It's a car covered with snow, but there's this sort of happy face in it. So for me, it's let's say it's not to find meaning in it. It's more like whatever happens, happens. And this reminds me of a quote of Andrei Tarkovsky: "If you look for a meaning, you miss everything that happens." Here's a little clip, and I hope it runs, from basically the opening scene of Ivan's childhood of Tarkovsky. I see a bit of a delay. I guess that's visible.
Мама, там кукушка.
Well, this is, for me, Tarkovsky is an incredible inspiration, because I think he is also a maker, visual maker, who plays a lot with the subconscious. And watching for me, the beginning of this film, it's one of his early films. It's such a good example how he also taps into all these specific elements: the texture of the leaves, the sand, the direction, the light. The interesting thing is that film, I would say, lacks the feeling sensation, but Tarkovsky sort of oversteps this boundary here by making it so visual or so feelable. How, you know, a face that touches leaves that starts flying, but it also leads this fantasy that the boy is looking at a butterfly, and then the boy is imagining that he is himself flying. So I think that sort of inspiration from that subconscious level can be incredibly important. Again, delay. Don't fill in all the gaps. A good narrative leaves room for the imagination of the reader. Here is a project I work with Don Weber. Johannes, please tell me if the video is running.
Yes, it's looking good.
Happy. So this is actually the second time I started to work with Don Weber. We already did a book together before that is called Interrogations. The nice thing is that if you start working with a photographer at the beginning of a project, there's a lot of room for interaction. So in this particular case, this story started by Don telling me a story about an article he read that two scientists found that there was more iron hidden in the sand of the beaches of Normandy than in any other beach in the world, and that really intrigued him, and that he thought of collecting samples of sand and having them photographed by a microscope and see if what would come out if you would photograph these grains of sand really up close. And that idea really intrigued me. So the book originally started with the idea of making this story about abstract photography that could mean something. So Donald went to Normandy to collect samples of sand, but also recently he bought his new digital technical camera. So he could not help himself by also making these beachscapes, so to say. And he, at some point, he asked me, "Do you think that there's room for my beachscapes as well?" And I looked at them. He also photographed a lot of monuments that are obviously there in Normandy. And I think it was at the time that I saw a lot of photo books remembering the Second World War that photographed a lot of monuments in areas where the war used to be very active. So I replied to Donald that I was not particularly interested in seeing a series of monuments, but I was very intrigued by the fact how this landscape, this beach landscape, is used today, or the fact that maybe an accidental monument or the site of a monument is equally important than a trash can that is there, or an ugly parking place, or whatever. So that became the first chapter of the book. Here you see the chapter that is about the microscopical photography. And what really intrigued me is that also here science and fantasy starts blending. We just saw this sort of incredibly big round iron ball hidden in the sand. And if you think about war and fighting on the beaches, then you might see in this iron ball a bullet. But then in the Second World War, a bullet was not round. The reality of the thing is that it is a microspherical. It's a tiny piece of metal that became so perfectly round because it started spinning after an explosion. And then there's another element, we just passed by it, which almost looked like an element from a gun or whatever, that turns to be a form that looks like iron, but that is in reality a bacteria that eats iron, that forms this form as it becomes the color. So here it was very challenging that we had different ways of storytelling. While we were working together, we felt that the book needed to be a representation of three different voices. Donald also told me that his grandfather made him become very interested in the war because his grandfather was part of the soldiers who actually went to Europe and were part of D-Day, and that his grandfather always told him stories. So at some point we said, actually, this book should show three different perspectives, three different voices. It's like, let's say, the voice maybe of the professional photographer, the voice of the scientist, the crazy scientist, and the voice of the little boy. That inspired Donald to make dioramas. We just flipped by them. So it became all these different chapters related to the book. At some point, we started to discuss, does it need some reference? Because all Donald photographs were not directly referring to the war. There was a moment in time that we thought of, like, maybe we should show one of Kappa's most famous photograph to just give it reference. But then it turned out to become something else. That was the last chapter you just saw, is that Donald at some point started to watch The Longest Day, which is a famous 1950 film about D-Day. And sort of subconsciously started to make screenshots while he was watching the film. And then he sent me a whole folder of screenshots, and I turned it into a sort of little graphic novel on the film. And we felt that that was really nice. Just before the publication, we all of a sudden were aware of the fact, is it actually doable connected to copyrights and that? And the answer to that question is no, because you cannot copy an original piece of work. So we got in contact with a lawyer who knows everything about copyrights, and she explained us that as long as you show short fragments of something, that it is considered quoting right. So then at that point, Donald asked her, how many short fragments can be considered quoting right? Because I think we used more than 200 shots from The Longest Day. And she said, well, there's no specific number. It's more like, you know, if you write a book about filmmaking and you use one screenshot or two from the film, then that's quoting right. But Donald was persistent in asking her, but how many? And she said, well, probably it sort of ends somewhere at 6 or 7 or 8. So that gave us the idea of working with 6 or 7 or 8. Obviously, we could not reproduce The Longest Day as we originally did. But what we started doing is watching everything film or television series ever made about D-Day, took 6 or 7 screenshots from it. Also, we found 3 documentaries that were made by the military that were in the public domain. And so we collected from that and sort of recreated our own story. Here's a few examples. I'm not going to tell a lot about this project, a project that I did with a Belgian photographer, Jan Rosseel, called Belgian Autumn. And it's about a violent gang being active in Belgium in the 1980s, leading to 26 deadly victims, of which one of them was Jan's father. This is a book that later got published by Belgian publishing house, but this is our 2 photographs of a book, a handmade book we did together. That was his graduation project. And the handmade book, there were only 26 copies, really got a lot of attention. Also, Martin Parr bought one and wrote about it. And because of the attention, Jan got connected to a gallery in Tokyo called Reminders Photography Stronghold, that is led by a lady called Yumi Goto. And Yumi was so enthusiastic about the book Jan and I made together that she both invited Jan and me to come over to teach photo book workshops. This was in 2015. We thought it was going to be a one-off exchange, but apart from the time of the pandemic, we have been there ever since, every year. And we have worked a lot since then with Japanese makers. Here's an example of a book we made in the first workshop by Hajime Kimura called Snowflake Dog Man. And you can see that we're really playing with the idea of a book as an object, a book as a 3-dimensional piece. A lot of these things we make in workshops are consisting out of multiple books or books in books or fold-out things. Here's another example of a crazy binding, the book Spin by Yusuke Tagagi, that was the winner of the, I think, the Arl Dummy Award. And Yumi Goto is thinking about the photo book very strongly, about the photo book as an object. And here's a quote that I wrote: "A photo book is a flywheel. As an object, it will be discussed, and therefore the story will reach out." here's an example of so I have to say that because of this collaboration with Yumi, my focus also started to shift. My focus always was very strong on creating the right sequence, the right visual narrative. That's, going back to this idea of being in between novel and film. So all of a sudden there's Yumi here, and Yumi gives me this incredible focus on the book as an object. And I have to say that since the collaboration with Yumi, that really influenced the way I work. Here's an example of a book of Sim Chi-in called She Never Wrote a Trishaw Again. It's a tiny little Japanese bound book that deals about the story of her grandmother traveling the world. And in the pockets that we have created in the book is the Chinese translation of the English narration, but also hidden postcards. So I started to think differently about what a book could be. And I already had that one axis, that the book somehow lives between the novel and film, that I didn't want to get rid of. And all of a sudden there's this new idea that I have, like a book is also a piece of sculpture. And I didn't want to kill the axis I had, because I think if you focus on a book from a narration perspective, I think that idea of the axis between novel and film is incredibly strong. If you focus on the book as more as a physical object, then the sculpture is very strong, but it doesn't necessarily connect very well with that idea of the axis. So I basically created another axis, and I wrote down on the other side of the axis of sculpture a play or theater. So this idea of a book being a sort of miniature theater. And it's always interesting. It's like my idea of the speed and the rhythm of the photo book, and then somebody says, hey, this looks very close to the quote of Louis Balls. It's always, if you think you have an original idea, then somebody tapped in on that idea already earlier. So after I wrote my sketch that I just showed you, I read in a book about Dutch photography books this conversation between Ralph Prins and Cas Poorthuis that happened in 1969. And it's not exactly the same, but it's so interesting that they really mention the same media. A photo book is an autonomous art form comparable with a piece of sculpture, a play, or a film. The photographs lose their own photographic characters as things in themselves and become parts translated into printing ink of a dramatic event called a book. For me, that is the best way to describe what a photo book actually is. The compilation or dramatic event of a story is more important than its individual part. That is, for me, incredibly important. Still going good with the videos and stuff?
Yes.
Okay. So now I am way more focused on this idea of the book as a physical object. This is also a second collaboration with an artist called Ying Ang. She lives in Melbourne. I already made a book with Ying before, so also here, like with Donald, we started to talk about the concepts and the book before Ying actually started to shoot. She already had this idea that is now also translated in this sort of tiny book that lies on top of the larger book. She told me that she met somebody in Australia, and that this person that she met felt like the person for forever, and that she was thinking about settling down, and that she wanted to tell a story about settling down, and that she hadn't seen many stories about settling down. So that was her original start of the story. But then shortly after she got pregnant, and 9 months later, she delivered a baby. And all of a sudden that brought her life in turmoil. And I think she was used as a photographer to travel a lot, to have a lot of freedom. Becoming a mother really changed life for her. And maybe post-traumatic depression is a little bit too strong for what she suffered from, but she had a very difficult first year. So she stopped photographing. And at some point she started sending me photographs. She said, because she always was very strict in how she photographed. She always shot 6x6 analog on a Hasselblad. And all of a sudden she said, I don't have the energy to photograph. I'm dealing with my motherhood, but I'm shooting with my phone and with whatever is around me. And would you mind if I just send you stuff and don't be scared because it's a mixture of everything. And can you tell me if there's a story hidden in there? So she indeed started to send me all sorts of photographs from black and white cameras, from iPhone, even from the video in that is in the baby room as a babysit device. And I was actually very intrigued by the variety of this work and the different quality, but also listening to her story about how she had a difficulty to adapt to in that first year of motherhood. I thought that the variety of all this work sort of tells something about being in turmoil. At some point, she came up with the title "The Quickening." Everything happens really quick. And I think it was a very intriguing way of mixing, especially all these different qualities. And I actually started to enhance the difference a little bit by also playing with some printing techniques, like the images from the babysit video are printed on blue paper using silver ink. There are a few photographs that we have translated in reso printing as a sort of dream state. So this whole mixture of different qualities. I think here's an example of a really, really high awareness of the texture of the photographs, the photographic texture, created this story about early motherhood. This is a quote by Richard Powers, an American novelist. An argument, graphs, and statistics don't change anyone's opinion. A good story does. Story are empathy machines. This is a project about the Belgian photographer Anton Kusters that is called Blue Skies. I will not go very deep into the project because I also want to I don't know where. Do you know where we are time-wise now, Johan?
Yeah, we have around 50 minutes left of our total time.
Okay, then I'm just going to show this as an example. Oh, sorry, we go. Yeah, that's the delay in my computer. Maybe I should. I think somehow further down in the presentation, this similar delay occurs. So I'm going to log off and start all over again. Not all over again, but
And just checking, you don't have any consuming apps running in your computer in the background?
No.
Yeah.
I make sure that everything is. I think it's just a heavy file.
Yeah.
And that in combination with Zoom, it gives difficulty.
Exactly.
Although, are we still there?
Yes.
Oh no, yeah. But the thing is that there is a delay. I already logged out, but then it took a while. So I'm going to share again.
We have a question here about the quote before the Tarkovsky video. Do you remember what it was? I was also about to write it, but then I didn't get it in mind.
I can go there. If you look for a meaning, you miss everything that happens. So I'm gonna start again.
Yeah, the videos in general, there is kind of there's always kind of skipping frames, but it doesn't.
Yeah, they're delaying. I see.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, of course.
They're too heavy. Am I on again?
No.
Oh, no.
No, there is.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll skip explaining about that project. If there are questions later, I will hear them. Okay, here's a quote from Douglas Rushkoff. We may not know where we are going anymore, but we're going to get there a whole lot faster. We all become overwhelmed until we learn to distinguish between data flows that can only be dipped into and data storage that can be fully consumed. We need stories that can be fully consumed, stories that we can contemplate too. The photo book is a form of data storage that can be fully consumed. So here's an image of a project I'm currently working on. What happens more and more is that before a book actually becomes a book that is going to be widely published, I collaborate with photographers on projects where the original form of the book is very handmade. This is very much inspired by the collaboration, as I mentioned before, with Yumi Goto also. But I really like doing that. First experiment before you actually talk with publishers or think about practicalities, is it printable or not? And this has led to some book project where the book is really different as an object. So here's a project, Seeing Against Seeing by Alexei Yurinev. Alexei is a photographer from the US that I met as a student at ICP. I'm teaching at ICP already for 10 years, and I think I met Alexei 8 years ago. Alexei decided to also take the master course, Photography and Society, that is taught here in the Royal Academy of The Hague, where I also am involved in. So I picked up with Alexei as a student teacher relation. But when he studied in The Hague, he was also living in Amsterdam, not very far from where I live. So we interacted quite often. And Alexei was working on a story that was about his grandfather who fought in the war. And his grandfather, just before he passed away, gave Alexei is from Russian descent, gave Alexei his honorary medals with the message like, you have to keep these medals and honor my legacy. But then Alexei felt, yeah, that's a beautiful message I got there, but my grandfather never spoke about the war. So what is the legacy? So he started to dive into the history of Russian soldiers fighting in the Second World War. Also, there was a story about the brother of his grandfather who actually passed away, who got shot, and nobody actually knows where he was buried or what happened with his body. So he started to do this research, and in this research he used artificial intelligence. So basically what he did is he made his own artificial intelligence machine, and he collected a lot of images, portraits and landscapes of the war that he put in a machine, and made the machine rerun those images and create new images, images that he calls actors of war or landscapes of war. And these images are relatively abstract because he's not working with Midjourney or those kind of programs that do these things hyper real. He's building his own machine, and the machine has its limitations. But these limitations made it very interesting. So that at some point we were going through these abstract photographs and editing them, and I saw the photograph here on the right, and I told Alexei, wait a second, I've seen this photograph before. And Alexei said, that's impossible because, you know, my computer just made this photograph. And I said, no, and it's probably not, it's not a photograph that is really exactly like this, but there's somewhere in my mind, and it is connected to photojournalism. Somehow I have seen this photograph. Either it was a winning photograph at World Press Photo, or I saw it in a book, or whatever it was. And it turned out that it was, it took me some time to sort of think like, what kind of book could it have been in? And then I thought about a book that is published 100 years ago by Ernst Friedrich called War Against War, or in German Krieg den Kriege, where Ernst Friedrich, being a pacifist, collected all the horrors of war in a book in order to sort of send a message how ugly war is. And when I flipped through the book, I found this image, which is obviously not exactly the same, but there's an interesting similarity. And while flipping through the book, we thought that this book had many, many similarities with the AI images of Alexi's work. And we decided actually to make a book. I mean, this is also, before you really have an in-depth concept, is a lot of playfulness. So I have this sort of, I think, 10th or 12th edition of the book on my bookshelf. So I showed Alexi the book, and Alexi ordered some of that exact same issue, a few secondhand books, and started to cut them up and to blend them with his own photographs. And this eventually became an artist book that he graduated with. That is now part of many photographic exhibitions on AI, on makers who work with AI. And that eventually the book became a really weird object, because in reality it's not such a thick pocket book, but the way we bound it with by hand and by glue, and we also made sort of translucent separations in order to create this idea of two stories being interwoven. It became a very thick, almost brick-like book. And then Alexi came up with the idea of welding an iron cast that we put it in. And so far he has created 24 artist editions. They are now collected by a university in New York. And we are currently working on the trade edition. The photo book has the aura of an original art piece.
Ik ga je vandaag in 15 minuten tijd een heel mooi verhaal vertellen over een vogeltje die zijn hele leven lang op de vlucht is. En ze gingen steeds meer lawaai maken. En het werd zo hard, dat geschreeuw, dat er een 112-lijn kwam. De buren hadden een klacht ingediend en hij moest voor de rechtbank komen.
There was someone knocking on the door. It was a little bird and was screaming loudly.
He looked at her and it looked like he wanted to tell her something. Follow me, come with me, I'll show you something.
But this is a little promo video of a project I did with Dutch photographer Anaïs Lopez 7-8 years ago. I already had this thought about the book as a play, and I was very intrigued by that. And when Anaïs showed me this work that she was working on about a bird in Singapore, it sort of all came together. And I proposed to Anaïs, what if we make a performance book and you start reading out loud from the book for little audiences? That happened 7 years ago. The performance was done from a specially made book that was as big that you could hold it on your lap, but also still possible to really read out loud from it. Only recently we have worked together for the third time. The Migrant was the second time that I worked with Anaïs. This is the third time. Where currently she has been working on a story called The Turtle and the Monk. And we were both very interested in sort of taking it one step further with that idea of a performance from a book. So we made a really huge book based on two books in one. The smaller book you see me here lying on the floor next to the book. The smaller book is a book that you can read out loud from, but basically giving this idea of, you know, reading out loud from a photo book in a small audience, but sort of making the audience feel that they can almost literally step into the book. So there's roughly 2/3 of the story that is told from reading out loud to the audience. And while you read out loud from that book, here's an example of Anaïs flipping through the larger book. But while you read through the smaller book, you actually sit into the pop-up of the cover of the larger book. So the cover of the larger book is a beautiful woodwork that has a pop-up, and that pop-up can function as a chair. So here you see Anaïs reading out loud from the tinier book, sitting on the larger book. Here's a little video of a performance she did a few weeks ago of the larger book, where she's sitting on the floor.
Sierlijke karpers zwommen daar in de vijver. En toen ging een deur open. Een oude man met een blauwe kimono stapte binnen. Hij boog en zei: mijn naam is Shinshu Tanaka en ik ben de hoofdpriester van deze tempel. Wat kan ik voor u doen? Ik boog en ik zei: ik ben Anaïs Lopez.
Here I will run through. So here we made a performance edition, which is that really big book, and we made a trade edition. So here I run you through the trade edition to tell a little bit about the story. Anaïs, and that I really like working with her, because she also has this sort of idea that when she starts a project, she just waits for things to happen. So after she comes from a very large family, and after her older sister passed away, she had cancer, she passed away, and Anaïs, being pregnant at the time, she decided to sort of take some time off, and she went to Kyoto to just be by herself. In her own words, I wanted to go to the other end of the world, to a culture that I would not understand and where I could not speak with the people, just to be by myself. And she spent several weeks there, being mostly at the river in Kyoto, until at some day she saw a turtle from afar, carrying a big stick, swimming in the river. And when she was studying the turtle better, she saw that the turtle actually had a golden shield, a worn-off golden shield. Well, golden shields don't appear naturally. So she was really very intrigued. But she could only photograph the turtle from afar. So she was a bit disappointed. And in the days that she had left in Kyoto, she started walking alongside the shore of the river, hoping that she would see the turtle again. And then it didn't happen for several days. But then on one of the last days before she had to go back again, she saw the turtle again. And now she was able to photograph it up close. Sadly, it was at an evening and she didn't carry her professional camera, but she took a photograph with her cell phone. This is the photograph of the turtle. And then she went back to the inn where she stayed, and she said, I saw this turtle with a golden shield. And then the innkeeper told her, well, but you haven't seen just a regular turtle. You have seen Kami. That is one of our most well-known goddesses. And she started telling about the turtle of the river that had golden hair in the past, etc., etc. And Anaïs became incredibly intrigued by this story. But she had to go back. She went back home. She became a mother. And this story of the turtle that she met, she couldn't let go of the story. So after a year or 3, when her daughter was already a little bit older, she decided to travel back with her mother and her daughter in order to explore the story more, but basically with the wish of seeing the turtle again, seeing the goddess. So she took off on a journey. and with a lot of accidental meetings. Like, for instance, she's walking with her daughter in the forest. Her daughter hears a sound. Her daughter walks towards the sound, and then they meet a shell blower. So somebody who is blowing on a shell in order to make noise. And Anaïs is talking with the guy, say, what is it you're doing? And he's telling Anaïs, I am talking, this is a way for us Japanese people to talk with the gods. And then Anaïs says, oh, if you can talk with the gods, can you give me directions? Because I'm looking for this goddess who is a golden turtle. And this is bit by bit by bit, a story that evolves. She also meets a fisherman. The fisherman is not so much talking about turtles, but about fish. Almost everybody she meets are talking about the situation we're currently in. Like, we're taking not good care of nature, and it becomes an environmental story. And Anaïs is also picking up on Japanese techniques, like the fisherman. She sees next to the fisherman washi paper with illustrations of fish, and she's asking, are you an artist? And the fisherman said, no, I'm a fisherman, but this is what we do when we capture a fish. And there's a practicality to it. Then we ink the fish, we print it on washi paper, and we let it loose again. But then we have proof that we captured a large fish. And if you do this with a dead fish, then you actually perceive his soul. And so all these stories, Anaïs is listening, and she is inspired by it, and she starts also changing as a maker. So she also starts experimenting with washi paper. She constantly returns to Japan altogether maybe 4 or 5 times in order to find the turtle again. At some point, she reaches the temple because people keep telling her the turtle is probably at the beginning, at the part where the river begins. There's a little temple, and that's holy ground, and that's probably where you find her. And eventually she reaches the temple and she meets the monk, which we see here illustrated. But the monk does not allow her in because this is holy ground and it's not for normal people to go there. And the end of the story is like a classical story. The story is more about the journey than the destination. Is that she never re-sees the turtle, but she learned a lot along the way, and eventually her daughter, which by now is 5 or 7, at some point picks up a shiny little stone, being aware of the fact that mother is already on the search for this magical turtle for many years, picks up a shiny stone and said, look, Mom, I found Kami, not so much the real turtle, but the idea of beauty or knowledge or whatever you're searching for, you can find around you as long as you look carefully. And that's sort of like the motto of the story. The edition book is also, we decided at some point, was not the idea at the beginning, that the edition book should be a resemblance of the performance book. So we also made the tiny little book that fits into the cover of the large book. And we recently published this as a self-published production. That's the thing with these kind of books. They are so experimental that it is very difficult to find a publisher getting involved in upfront, because they're all afraid of let's say, the production difficulty that you have. We printed 425 books. It's also connected to the relationship between the Netherlands and Japan that exists for 425 years. And so it's also, we also want the book to have a place in this the year 2025 that we're currently in is the year when Japan and the Netherlands sort of celebrate this idea of 425 years of relationship. And here's my last thought and quote: "A photo book will outlive you." And that's it. And now I'm going to stop it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. if you
I try.
if you stop the
But there's still
presentation,
a
or did you do
delay.
it? Yeah. And we'll see the talking heads. And feel free to ask questions, raise your hands, put your cameras on. It's idea now to have like an open discussion for anyone to attend. And thank you very much. It's super inspiring. Love the story, like storytelling, listening and creating together, and really kind of exploring the different aspects also of what a photo book could be. I was adding here photo book as a novel, as a film, as a play, as a sculpture. And before the talk we were discussing the photo book as an instrument. And,
Yeah.
and you said you were curious about also in the future maybe exploring that.
I hope that will be part of my future, photo book and music.
Yeah. Do you want to say, Emmanuel, something about just something when we talked about the music aspect of and you working a lot with both the self-publishing and the music, seeing connections there? Well, you are muted, Emmanuel. We don't hear you. Yes, no.
Yes, thank you, Teun. That's yes, a beautiful exercise in storytelling itself, the presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, a lot to take in. And yes, and interesting in these talks to see for the first time you as a graphic designer, in a way, your involvement in photobook. We're probably more used to see, excuse me, the photographer as the storyteller. So more in charge of the content, and the graphic designer more in charge of the form, and as you say, making the form invisible or completely in line with with the content. So it's great to see you explain about your involvement in many cases of the book, more as the storyteller, where the photographer, you know, is kind of guided by you, or the story is created by you in a way, maybe in a way that a film director kind of works.
Yeah.
So yes, I find that.
Yeah, I think I see my role very much like that as a film director, with that difference that a film director often is also the person being responsible for wanting to get the story out there, and obviously also not alone. Film director also works with director of photography or music people, or obviously the screenwriter might be the original initiator. The difference here is that there are a lot of similarities, because I think where the main similarity is being this person that has like a connection with all the people being involved and keeping an overview. The big difference is that the original spark and idea and passion or whatever, it still comes from the photographic maker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in that sense, it's a very strong collaboration.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I mean, Emma last week talked a lot about collaboration. So in that sense, it's pretty much a collaboration between you and the photographer. And that's very interesting. Yet you are, the author is the photographer then?
Yeah.
Okay. In the credit, that's quite interesting. And then that led to my other question after that. We talked about, and you talked about the photo book as objects and the responsibility behind, the project. So that lies with the photographer. But who's in charge then of the distribution, of the making public, or the term that Emma used last week, of the activating of it?
Well, let's say for a lot of projects, I still collaborate with publishers. It's more like I think I ended my presentation with 2 projects that are really different from the average book, the performance book or the book of Alexi in the box. Elena, for instance, is a book that started where Elena and we, let's say, I often start directly with the photographer. So when I start, there's often no publishing house involved. But I am very well connected with some publishing houses. So whenever I know how a book evolves, and if I feel it is fitting with a certain publishing house, then we reach out to publishers. This is what happened with Carper Fucking Gem with Elena. So we reach out to Kehrer, German publishing house, and especially a publisher working for Klaus Kehrer at the time, Alexia, who was working there. She, as a woman, she was very interested in the story and really wanted to bring it in. So that also happens a lot. And then obviously these publishers are responsible for storage, distribution, PR, and all that. If I look at Anaïs, her case, then she literally has to distribute herself. But in order to get PR or attention, this is also part of the larger project. So with the project of The Turtle and the Monk, when we launched the book, we also was in the same week that we opened an exhibition in the Siebold Museum in Leiden here in the Netherlands, which is a museum connected to Japanese art. And this show runs for 8 months. Then after that show is done, a month after, there will be a show of the Nautical Museum here in Amsterdam, who have strong connections with Japan as well. And it's going to run for another 6 months. During these shows, Anaïs will do a lot of performances. So basically this whole, apart from that, in the exhibition is also a short film of 35 minutes that runs. And this short film will also be broadcasted on Dutch television. So it's all this PR, it's part of the project. And whenever there's attention, there are always a few people obviously interested in buying a book. So what normally is the role of a publishing house for PR is now something we sort of embedded in the collaboration.
Yeah, interesting model. And maybe the question, you finished by saying that photobook will outlive you or us.
Yeah, us.
And so, well, I'm curious about that. How will they outlive us? Because don't they need us to exist?
What I mean is, let's say this quote is actually coming from a collaboration I once had when I was still working for Press Photo. I was once invited, being one of the 6 tutors in a concept that they have that they do yearly called the Masterclass, the Joop Zwart Masterclass. And what they do is they select 12 young photographers and bring them together with 6 more experienced people in the field. And in this particular case, it was from the 6 people, the professional people were 3 photographers. Don Weber was one of the photographers. And it was also, interestingly enough, 3 photographic editors. So I was one of the editors as a bookmaker. There was Claudine Bouclin. She was an editor responsible for starting up Magnum in Motion roughly 20 years ago, like making little videos of photographs from Magnum. And it was Megan Lorem, who at the time was a photo editor at the New York Times and is currently the director of photography of the New York Times. And it was especially Megan Lorem that was constantly excusing herself that she could not show her early work because what she did is she made photographic work in a digital form. Like she made these 10-minute presentations from Magnum. And she said, it's a pity that I cannot show my early medium because it was made with Flash 1 or whatever, and now we're Flash 4. And that made me think that in digital storage, it is very difficult to recreate something that is made at a certain time. And this is so nice about this old-fashioned medium of the book. It is an object, it's paper, it's out there. And yes, let's say some of the titles I have made might be way gone before I'm gone. But I am a strong believer in the fact that a few of these stories will still be out there in 300 or 400 years' time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you were talking about their materiality, okay.
Yes.
It's a beautiful quote, but I was like, hang on, what is the purpose of a book? What is it without us? And what is the purpose? That would be my last question, because there'll be others. So what is the purpose of such photo book?
For me, the purpose is that you leave something, you leave a story behind, something personal, something intimate. Compared to, for instance, documentary filmmaking, the photo book has a huge difficulty to reach out to a large audience, and that is getting even more difficult because it's easier now to get access to the realm of photo book making than it was 20 years ago. So we have way more competition. But you make something that will be there for a longer period of time. Let's say I'm also involved as a graphic designer in sending in books for competitions and all that. That's all very flashy, and you obviously want to have a little bit of attention or you want to have success. But for me, that is all not so important. For me, it is important that you make something that maybe somebody finds in 30 years' time and learn something from it, or has a good time with it, or inspires somebody, and that it might be a book that was completely unsuccessful in the now. And for me, that is the magic of bookmaking.
I agree. Yes, I think
I was drawing some parallels to what José was talking about in the first lecture. We were discussing about the history and the narrative of the photo book, and how our kind of understanding of what a photo book is, how it kind of has begun and how it's been grown. And I kind of noticed it was interesting when you were speaking about the Colors magazine in the beginning. We were in the discussion after the first talk, we were thinking about the impact of magazines in storytelling, and also their relationship, kind of magazine and photo book, and kind of how they intertwine, and kind of different kind of maybe levels also of different levels of publishing, and how it is kind of, it's not always maybe so in a way boxed that it may seem when you receive this kind of competitions and books and when things are categorized really in certain ways. How do you feel about this kind of fluctuation and kind of different kind of areas of visual storytelling, images bound into packages, different kind of packages? How, when a magazine, a book, and a zine, what is what and why? And I think it of course comes back to the meaning of what kind of stories needs to be told, and what that kind of the story is found through that. Yeah, this was maybe a not very clear question, but just reflecting around this.
Yeah, let's say we still have a lot of magazines on paper. We have zines. The zine is like a newer thing. I think it's sort of like more like independent magazine making. I mean, in the old days, all these kind of things were part of industry. The photo book world was also part of an industry. I remember when I got this interest, but as I mentioned, I was making catalogs for World Press Photo and maybe some festivals here in the Netherlands. I was interested in working directly with photographer. So where do you start? So obviously I presented myself to photo book publishers who were very active at the time, and then I noticed that this industry is a very closed industry, or it's very difficult to get in. I think I was lucky that I started to have an interest in photo book making at the early stages of sort of self-publishing, where photographers were maybe rejected a few times by publishers, and they just said, I'm just going to do it myself. And I think if you look at the industry, there's a huge, let's say, I used to work for a professional magazine before I became an independent designer. And all these things are, big industries. And obviously that has completely changed by the invention of the internet. So now everything is way more independent, and all these structures we still have that are also still interesting are becoming more and more fluid. Like serious magazines, apart from a few, almost do not exist anymore. But zines, as a sort of using the same concept but doing it independently, came into the market. And if you look at the average book form nowadays, photo book form compared to 20 years ago, you also see how it has changed. It has completely evolved into way more independent making than 20 years ago. And I really encourage that. There's also there's a flip side to it. I think in these old structured days, it was easier, for instance, to distribute. Because if a publisher would say, I believe in this title, then maybe he was very good in predicting, but it was also a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you believe in the title and you invest in it and you print 10,000 copies and you make sure that there's distribution, then there's for sure an audience that will buy it. And this is something I think we have lost, and which is very difficult to bring back. But I think, I encourage all these forms of different media, and I think there's a lot of gray areas in between. There's a lot of gray area in between zines and books. There's a lot of gray area in between formal magazines and books. What also going back, diving into my admiration of Tibor Kalman, who was the art director of Colors in the 1980s and 90s. If you look at these old color magazines, where they sort of play with this massive use of visual imagery combining with text and all that, then you could say, hey, maybe this was a prediction of online communication that we have today, social media communication. And then I am really sad to see how visual, alive, and joyful people like Tibor Kalman worked in the 80s and the 90s, and how little of that is left on social media presentation. Although you would say, this is the ideal platform for it, but somehow I think it's because trying to get everybody access to these mediums, they made it very simple to use. But in this simplicity of usage, it's also a simplicity of the visual outcome.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's a more democratic tools, but whose responsibility is it? Is it so much that we have lost? The publishers were in charge, and their responsibility was to distribute widely because of the commercial impact of that. But through self-publishing or independent publisher, we still have that same responsibility.
Yes, absolutely.
But we have more creative means to do so. Maybe that's where it becomes more interesting.
Yeah, we have creative means, and it's also not that the digital realm is the devil. I think connected to self-publishing, I mean, you just asked me that question, Emmanuel, like how does the self-publisher distribute? But I think the role of social media in this particular case is incredibly important, to make sure that your story gets out there. That's also where that quote, the photo book is a flywheel, comes from. You have nowadays, the average run is relatively low. So you might say, hey, I created a story on this beautiful object and it only reaches out to 1,000 people. But the reality is that it often reaches out way further, because there are discussions, because there are initiatives, like you are all part of initiatives around bookmaking, forming collectives, or at the moment while we speak, we reach out to multiple people, of which people have learned about the stories that I just mentioned, that not necessarily end up owning the book. And that's what I feel, if you create a very powerful visual medium that almost has the aura of an art piece, as you can say, then this will make sure that because of the fact that it is such a powerful object, that people will talk about it. And for me, that is also a responsibility.
Yes, Vreni.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting to see all of your beautiful work that you've done. I kind of am also struck at that you are not, you know, that you're just the graphic designer, that you're not a co-author, which I feel you are. But also, yeah, writing the text and being so involved at an early stage. I was going to say that with the self-publishing, I mean, it really was the idea initially that why we founded or why Reflektor was founded, because we tried to create more visibility for self-published photo books that we liked. It's still not easy. It's a little bit easier, but it's like kind of like the photographers take more time to do crowdfunding events and films and promotion for the social media than actually to be able to, you know, do your original work. But I mean, I also like that you said, well, it's also part of the bookmaking process, you know, that you how to activate it, like with Anaïs and her very interesting way of how she also does these performances. I just wanted to also quickly connect to the discussions we had previously about artist books and photo books. Do you like, because I mean, well, the turtle and the monk, and obviously there's so many different also drawings and things inside, but you still consider them photo books, or is that not something that you're interested in?
It's not something I'm really interested in. For me, if you call it a visual novel or whatever, then that works for me as well. My reality is that it is often photographers who come up with the spark of an idea based on the fact that they are just out there photographing. I mean, that's also with Anaïs the case. At some point, and this is purely Anaïs, her decision. So the story is about meeting all these interesting Japanese people that give her advice, and she's basically not, I mean, she's following them partly, but basically not listening. And she, at some point, she said, I also shot photographic portraits of these people, but for me, they are not so interesting because they are so real. So then we came up with the idea of connecting to an artist in Kyoto. He is a painter illustrator who is working very strongly in a tradition of Japanese monks and how they used to draw in the temples, and he is basically the one responsible for visualizing the people that Anaïs met, and that's also where when Emmanuel just mentioned the director part, then it becomes very interesting, because now we have a director part, because we include another individual artist with his own style. But at the same time, we also want this artist to adapt a little bit to Anaïs's story, to the format, maybe the format of the book. When we met, Yuta is his name. When we met Yuta, then I started researching where this traditional painting of Japanese people came from. And it is connected to sliding doors. So they often make landscape kind of drawings that should function both if it's a 2-panel as well as a 4-panel, because that's the door open and the door closed. And Yuta had a lot of inspiration from these original monks. He's, by the way, at the moment living in a temple where he is working on the doors of the temple, and that's going to last 4 years. And while he is working on the doors, he might live there. So that gave me the idea of working with these 4 fold-out panels of 4. But I also should convince at that time Yuta that he needs to think in that concept, because you know, the let's say panorama ratio of a 4-panel is different than the ratio of a page. And the interesting thing is that so we met with Yuta first online. we let him make some trial drawings, and we explained about the whole project. And if he was interested, then he made some trial drawings. Well, luckily, I'm in a position, still collaborating a lot with Yumi, that we are invited in Japan every year. So at some point, I met with him, and he showed me his early drawings, and I reflected on it. And then it's finding the ideal way of giving some steering, but more on a sort of pragmatic level. It needs to fit in the book, etc. But also letting him be as free as individual, as an artist as possible. And over the period of time that we worked on the project, I had 2 meetings with him, and it's always also nice to have personal contact there, because then it's about trusting each other. But these are very complex processes, but very fun to do. For me, the turtle and the monk is maybe because also Anaïs started doing other techniques than just photographing techniques. But there's also a lot of photography technique in this. We use Toyobo printing, which is a very old photographic printing technique coming from Japan. But I'm not really, I think there needs to be a certain element of photography in it. It's sort of like the question, like where does a zine stop and where does a book begin, or something like. You don't really know, but it needs. If it would be only drawings, then obviously it's not a photo book anymore. But I think as long as it's connected to photographic storytelling, maybe a little bit cinematic storytelling, then for me it's still a photo book.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting him. Martina, you had your hand.
Hi, thank you. I just opened the video. Okay. Hello.
Hey, Martina.
Hi. Question about that actually. So, where does the photo book stops and something else begins? I'm asking because I'm a visual artist, also painter, and opera singer, a classical singer. So I do both. I do music and art. And I wanted to ask about what you also mentioned, putting music and the photo book, because my idea was to create a photographic project along with some music pieces that I would record. And the question is which way to go, because I'm at the beginning as the first project like that. So whether performance, keep it like that, photo book performance as you showed the example, go digital, or go just like classic, like CD or cassette, along the photo book. From your experience, how do you see that? Or it can be all of them?
Yeah, I think you have to keep an open mind. Before I started my lecture, we were indeed briefly talking about photo books and music, and I told them that roughly 10 years ago there was an organization connecting to World Press Photo that I was still working for at the time, and they said, you're an organization involved in photography, and we just created this possibility of having sound in a book. So is it not possible that we can make a book of the winning images of last year, and we turn that into a sort of showcase book? I don't know how it technically worked, but somehow they had sort of like very thin metal strips, I think, that were responsible for creating the sound glued into the paper sheets. According to me, it didn't really look very nice, because it was too plasticky and too, let's say, it didn't really relate to what I was used into the book realm on a tangible level. But this is all connected to how things are evolving. So I'm sure whatever it was ugly 10 years ago will be solvable either today or tomorrow. So you can wait and see if there literally is something that music will fit into pages. They will invent something anytime soon, I'm sure. And other than that, I think because Emanuela was also talking about the sound of the book, the flipping of the pages, or for instance, I just showed you the little video of Anaïs sitting on her knees, flipping through an incredibly large book where I think not only her voice, but also the way she moves her body or how she folds out the pages are all part of an experience. So there's the sound is here really an active part of the book experience, but also even the body posture or the movement is an active part of the book. I cannot answer the question where does a book end and a performance or something other art medium begins. I can only tell you that I'm personally particularly interested in these boundary areas. I come from the book. I build up a lot of knowledge about printing and typesetting, but also textual editing and looking at photography and photographic editing. So I think I sort of what I'm aware of is that I build up 20 years of experience in dealing with the more traditional book form, and I want to use my future career or the years that I will still be active in this realm, actually in exploring where this boundary is, not so much to find out where it is, but just to be active in that gray area in between the media. And I think that for me that is enough. I don't need to have an answer where something stops or something begins. I just love to be active in that a little bit unclear area.
One more thing about Japan, because you talk quite a lot about it, and the sound. From your experience again, are Japanese in general interested in this sort of thing, so the boundaries, or they rather let's focus on the image only, or let's focus on the sound only? Do they like to mix things?
I think what I really found very special in working with Japanese participants in the workshop is that they are way more open in order to make their own books, doing their own sewing or their own folding or their own gluing in. Let's say I often, not so much anymore with a younger generation of photographers, but I would say if I work with a generation of photographers who is my age, then they feel like, I'm the photographer. What do you mean thinking about layout, or what do you mean thinking about typography or folding a book or whatever? Then they're like, I'm photographer and there are other people responsible for making the medium. And this blending of being like fully responsible is something that is very natural in Japan, which obviously I think is connected to their culture, culture of worshipping, culture of origami or whatever it is. But I also have to say that with a younger generation, also in other parts of the world, that bookmaking now became actually an active part of studying photography or being interested in photography, and this is something that is a very interesting positive change, I think.
Yeah, I'm asking because I'm heavily inspired, obsessed with Japan. So yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
We are now running out of time. Do you still have a few minutes for 10? Are you need to run or?
No, I still have a few minutes.
Yeah. I have one question. If there's no one else, then I was thinking about kind of this switch, like on your kind of personal story. You said you made a sabbatical and then focused on writing your paper. I got a bit curious about what kind of happened there. Kind of what was the choices that you made? I feel I need to have a sabbatical. How did you land into this kind of theoretical area of the practice, and then how did it then kind of change, or how do you feel like it kind of evolved your work after that?
That's a good question. There was two reasons for sort of planning this sabbatical. At some point, even although I really like my work and I'm constantly connected to interesting new stories, at some point we were dealing with so many projects that I felt, I was going around in circles a little bit, and I thought maybe, it's not that I feel I need to do something else, but maybe it's just healthy to take one step back in order to step back in again. So that was one reason. And the other reason was that also because of the workshops that I do and the lectures that I give, that sometimes people would say, hey, why don't you put all this knowledge in a book and maybe publish it? So my original idea was to maybe publish a book on bookmaking, on photo bookmaking. But I started in my sabbatical trying to read everything that was already out there. And then I also found there's already a lot out there, and a lot of the things that so I thought, maybe I'm not sure. I mean, obviously there's always a different approach. My approach would be slightly different. But I think that sort of overview, like the steps to take in how to make a photo book, that was definitely already out there. So then I decided to focus on the editing process, because I always found it very difficult to read something really valid about editing, the decision making, but also found it very difficult to explain myself. If I do an edit with a photographer in a workshop and a photographer says, can you explain exactly what you're doing? Then that's very difficult. And I always felt like, let's say my answer was always, I just follow my gut feeling. In order to describe, I'm not so much intellectually thinking right now. I'm just following a mood or whatever it is. But then I thought, okay, my gut does not make decisions, obviously. So it must be another part of my brain, which is not so much the semantic or intellectual part of the brain, but another part of the brain that makes you follow textures or vagueness or whatever it is. And when I read this book of the neurologist, I became really intrigued by that, and I decided to focus on that.
No, thank you. It's really, I think it's important that we share these kind of personal narratives and kind of have the understanding of how things are evolving and how we kind of things in a professional manner go forward. Emmanuel, do you want to? I saw your chat. Do you want to just comment as I note to Martina's questions?
Oh, no, Martin, I just put a few references in the chat about artists to use images as scores and books as scores and explore that relationship. And a lot of my work does that as well, so you can have a look. But
Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm more interested in, yes, that process of editing is very interesting in a way, in terms of storytelling and photo book making, and photographers, finding ways of creating edits of their work. So that's, and your way was interesting, Teun, because it kind of, well, at least for now, bypassed, the kind of the semantic content of the image and the emotional content by purely looking at the visual aspects. And but then it's very difficult. The impact of the images, or of the world on us is not just through the eyes and the brains, but through the heart as well. There's been some neurological studies made about that before emotions are triggered not just by what we see first, but by feeling. So that's quite interesting.
Let's say our brains or our computer is embedded in this biological thing that is us.
And it's the heart that reacts first, that then triggers the nervous system that tells you how to react. So that's quite interesting in a visual culture to have forgotten that. But if not, it's interesting to go back to filmic kind of editing sequences. You showed us Tarkovsky, he was a master of that, but Hitchcock first, with the cuts, from the linear or the 3-4 views, point of views. It's quite interesting. And Eisenstein as well. And there's a book that has been written about that, but I can't remember whom, about photographic editing, but through all these different filmic positions. And in your work, it's great to see, all the videos we saw of the book, and they were slow enough for us to see the flow of images. There's, that mastery of the editing process.
There's for people who are interested, there is this article, is online. It's I'll share it in the. So it's an online magazine, and it's people from the University of Toronto who are responsible for it, and they call themselves Trans-Asia Photography, and they make publications on photography every now and then. And this is the latest edition, and it is completely on photo book making.
Good. This is really good reference. I think now it's time to end to respect our schedules.
Yes.
And I'm really thankful for your time, and it's been very inspiring, and happy to kind of wrap up the talk series with your session. So I'm gonna say bye to everyone, and we'll stay in the room with the organizer and Teun for a few minutes.
Thank you. Bye.
And
Bye bye.
Thank you.
thank you
all.
Bye bye.